Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you for joining us tonight. Before we get to our main topic tonight, just a few thoughts on the Trump tariffs. Now, I'm not an economist. I'm definitely not an expert on tariffs. I've kind of heard both sides of the issue. I want to start with those who are really opposed to the Trump tariffs. And they basically say, well, it's just a tax. Corporations are not going to pay the tax. It's passed on the consumer. It's a bad thing to do. It's going to destroy the economy, all that. I understand the opposition to adding to the expense of anything, and I can kind of see their point on that. But, our country has become just a consumer economy for the last couple of decades now. We don't manufacture near what we used to manufacture. Think about all the things that we're dependent on other countries from, including people who are not our friends, like the Chinese. So many jobs that we've lost. And a lot of these things were lost through these different trade treaties we did throughout the years. And so as far as the tariffs go, number one, I think it's pretty obvious that Trump's goal is to use the threat of tariffs, which he is willing to follow through on, to these countries if they are not willing to play ball and reduce their tariffs. And, for the ones who are really opposed to this, they say, we're going to add a tax, add to the cost because it's passed on the consumer. I don't understand why they're not upset that we have all these deals with these countries that put tariffs on our products, because that makes it harder for us to sell our products in other countries. And so I don't understand why they're not upset about that. And it seems like Trump's strategy so far is paying off. Netanyahu was in D.C., I think yesterday. He said, hey, yeah, we're going to go to zero tariffs. European Union, Ursula, I won't even say her last name. You probably, if you followed this at all, you know who I'm talking about. I'm sure I'd mispronounce her last name anyhow. Basically, the European Union is ready to do zero tariffs. Other countries have already reached out to the Trump administration saying, hey, we want to do a deal. And I think that was his goal. I don't think he really wanted a tariff war, a trade war, whatever you want to call it. I think he wanted exactly what's happening. And I think that's better for everybody. If we don't have tariffs on our stuff and they don't have tariffs on theirs, that is free trade. What we've been doing, I guess you could say, is technically free trade, but it definitely wasn't fair trade. And it wasn't fair to us, wasn't fair to our country. And so I'm glad to see what he's doing. Like I say, I'm not an expert on the economy. I'm not an expert on tariffs. But with all the restrictions that have been put on our country over the years from these other trading partners, even supposed allies that put these tariffs on us, I'm glad to see it. I think overall it will work out in the long run, and the long run, that means beyond Trump's term. This is not going to be an overnight success. It may be more successful and quicker than what we anticipate. Now, some of the people that are opposed, obviously the Democrats are going to oppose anything Trump says. That's true with a lot of your Republicans. Anything Trump does, they're against. There are some people who I think just have, they just are totally against tariffs. And so I understand them being totally against tariffs, but I don't understand how they justify in their mind us having trading relationships with countries that don't treat us fair. That I don't understand. But we'll see how it turns out. I think it's going to go a whole lot better than what a lot of people do. In any event, we have to do something. You don't go from being a manufacturing economy to a service economy and then back to a manufacturing economy overnight. But if we're going to stay if we're going to be a strong country, we have to be more self-sufficient. In order to be more self-sufficient, we have to bring back more industry to our country. We have to be able to provide for ourselves, and especially when we have the resources available. And I also think that Trump, and I don't know how soon this will happen. I know he's not going to get full cooperation from the Congress, but I do believe he does want to cut the size and scope of government. Now we'll see whether or not that happens, especially since we have, the House and Senate to deal with that issue, and I don't think most of them really want to see that. So that'll determine a lot of what he can get accomplished. But I think he does want smaller government. Well, if you're going to have smaller government, you're going to cut the waste, you're going to cut a lot of the handouts that we should have never been given to people, then you kind of need to have some jobs for those people to go to. So I think, other than, fast food places. So I think this is a good thing overall. It's not going to happen overnight. Didn't get in this situation overnight and not going to get out of it overnight. But I think it's the right step. And understand, I do not have either variation of TDS, Trump Derangement Syndrome. I don't think that everything he does is right. I don't think everything he does is wrong. There's things about him I don't like. There's things about him I do like. But I do believe he does what he thinks is right for the country, whether we actually agree or not. And so I think he has better intentions than the last president, has better intentions for the country than Obama, and I think has better intentions for our country than any president we've had in quite a while. I don't agree, like I say, with all of his issues, all of his decisions, but I think he is trying to do what's best for the country, and I do think he loves the country. And hey, that's a nice change considering what we just finished with the Biden administration. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents, and that's about what it's worth when it comes to tariffs. Our guest tonight was going to be Cathy Hinners, but unfortunately, Cathy is not going to be able to join us tonight. Something came up she had to take care of, and so we'll get her rescheduled as quick as we can and get her back on here. I'm not going to try to fill in her part. I am going to talk a little bit about the topic, but I'm not going to try to do the show without her, so to speak. There's something that the topic, of course, tonight we were going to talk about, basically the Islamist in our country and state, and I'm still going to hit on that a little bit. Now, when I finish that, I'm going to touch on some legislation, and then we are, for the first time, going to open up the phone lines. If you have questions or comments, you'll be able to either call, and I'll give you the number when the time comes, or you can ask it in the chat, and the producer will ask me the question, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. There's some things, a lot of things I don't have the answer to. Anyway, I don't know if you heard about it or not, but down in Texas, there's plans for what they're calling an epic community, and it's an Islamist community. Okay, now, if you've watched me at all on these shows, you know I have zero use for Muslims. Islam is evil. Plain cut and dried. There's no way around it. A religion founded by a raping, murdering pedophile is evil and always will be. Sharia law is incompatible with our Constitution. Okay, that's just the bottom line. Well, they're in the process. They've bought, I think it's about 400 acres in Texas, in the Dallas-Plano area, and I'm not very familiar with Texas, but 400 acres, I think it's going to hold 1,000, it's going to be a community of 1,000 people. They're going to have a mosque, they're going to have their own school, all this and all that. And of course, there's been the claims made that, it'll be a Sharia-compliant community. Of course, they deny that. However, do you really believe that if they create a community of their own, that it won't be Sharia-compliant? Do you really believe that it won't be a no-go zone there in Texas? Now, Governor Abbott has spoke up about this. They are investigating this construction, which the construction apparently hasn't started yet. So they have the plans for it. As I understand it, they haven't actually started to do anything, but and I guess there's some preliminary things that they would have to do before they can actually start any construction. And of course, they've already got a lawyer to push back against what the state is trying to prevent. Now, in 2017, they did pass a law in Texas, and I'm not familiar with the wording of it. This is just from the article. Governor Abbott mentioned that, Sharia law is not legal in Texas. Now, it's probably, and I'm just guessing, similar to the law in Tennessee, which didn't mention Sharia, just said that the U.S. and Tennessee constitutions are the only legitimate law that will be followed in Tennessee. We did that 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. This Yasser Qadi, who is the head of that organization down there that is trying to establish this community, he's a real bad actor. There's a lot of information on him. There's a Tennessee connection. He lived in Memphis for years. Okay, and if you just type in Yasser Qadi online, I'm sure you can read and maybe find some videos of some of the things he says. But he's an Islamist. Okay, once again, totally incompatible with our Constitution. I don't understand, after everything that's happened, 9/11 on, why more people don't realize that anybody that follows the doctrine, not just somebody who says, hey, well, their family is Muslim. We're not talking about people who just may be cultural Muslims, but if they say that they're a Muslim and they follow the doctrines of Islam, there's no such thing as radical Islam. Islam is radical. There's not a separate Quran. There's not a separate hadith or summa. It's not separate. Okay, you either follow it or you don't follow it. And if you follow it, it is flat out evil. You need to do some research on this if you don't know anything about it. Now, Cathy's website, dailyrollcall.com, she's got some great information on there. There's another website by another Tennessean, that'd be Dr. Bill Warner, CSPI International, the Center for Study of Political Islam.org. That's a good website, and it talks about political Islam. I was talking with a friend earlier today, and it was kind of put this way in terms of, there's no real separation in Islam. It is all a system for everything. Okay, it's a religion. It governs their laws. It's their military. It's all into one. Your mosque is the mosques are military headquarters. Okay, our churches are not military headquarters. Synagogues are not military headquarters. Mosques are also military headquarters. Anyway, discussion earlier and talking about the difference between the mentality. So, for instance, there's some Christians that won't eat pork because they still follow the Old Testament on that, but obviously Jews won't eat pork. Well, Muslims won't eat pork, but the way they work and the way they think is they don't eat it and you shouldn't either. Okay, they're not content to just live and let live. They're not here to just be another religion. They want to control. And I'm not making this up. If you go to Cathy's website on dailyrollcall.com, you can read the Muslim Brotherhood, the Memorandum of Understanding. It lays out what they're here to do and how they plan to do it. And it's not, at least initially, it's not bombs and suicide bombers. It talks about using the society against itself, tearing down our civilization with our own hand. And we have so many stupid people in power. That's how they're doing it. People that don't recognize, don't know anything about this doctrine, even though we've been over fighting in the Middle East for how long now, even after 9/11, even after 1979 when the Iranians took all those hostages. From then on, what do we see? We see attacks by Islamists. And it just blows my mind that people have not figured out that, it's just the radicals. No. The religion, the doctrine is radical. That's what's radical. Say that again there, Mr. Producer. Oh, okay. Okay, the reference was to Waco. Also in Texas, obviously, and that was a sectarian branch. Branch Davidians is what they were known as, named after their leader. And yeah, they were technically or supposedly a Christian cult. I mean, it was obviously a cult. There was obviously some bad things going on. Now, I will say this. I think the way our government handled that was wrong, flat out wrong. Ended up killing a lot of innocent people in that. But what I'm getting at in terms of this, the creation of an Islamist community, a planned Islamist community, is going to be a problem for that area. Okay, I mean, we're glad that Yasser Qadi is no longer in Tennessee, but there's still plenty of radicals here. Don't kid yourself. She broke my own rule. There's still plenty of Islamists here. All right, plenty of them. Nashville's ate up with them, as is Memphis. But when you have a society like that, a cult, a religious cult like Islam, that they're just totally incompatible with the Constitution. They're really incompatible with civilization, to be honest with you. Now, I'm not an expert on the Branch Davidians that Kevin mentioned, but that definitely were some bad things going on there. But that was definitely a cult. Oh, will they handle it the same way they did? Oh, no, my guess is, granted, the Waco thing, I think that was mostly with, that was the feds. The feds stepped in. I think Texas would initially handle this. Right now, they're trying to make sure that all the laws are being followed in terms of the building of this. That's one of the things that Governor Abbott's done, is said, okay, we're going to make sure that everything is being done in accordance with the law as far as all the proper permits and all that. And then, of course, he did mention Sharia law and mentioned that it's not legal in Texas, that they passed a law on that several years ago. My bigger point is people need to understand that if you were to have a group, if you were to have an Islamic society outside of any community or around any community, especially that large, you're going to have some serious problems. You are definitely going to have some serious problems because they're going to grow out from there. It may start off as 400 some acres, but you think they're not going to expand? You think as they expand that they're not going to be look, if you pay any attention at all to what's going on in Europe, look how they have just ruined Europe. Look at France. Look at Germany, Sweden. I mean, they have taken over those places. Ireland. Everywhere they let these people in any significant number, they ruin it. Talk about there goes neighborhood. Yeah, there goes neighborhood. Now you got a no-go zone. So anyway, when we get Cathy back on, we'll talk more about this and other things, some other things going on in Tennessee related to that. But once again, on her website, dailyrollcall.com, I would encourage you to read the Muslim Brotherhood Memorandum of Understanding. And on Bill Warner's website, CSP International, Center for Political Study of Islam International.org. Great information as far as the doctrine goes, understanding their doctrine, how it's all intertwined. There's certainly no separation of church and state with Islam. Okay, it's all there, and they're on a mission. So we need to be aware of that. And I don't know why we don't already look at them when somebody identifies as a Muslim. I don't know why we don't have the same response as if they had just told us they were a Nazi. Okay, I mean, that's the way I see it. If somebody tells me they're a neo-Nazi, it's not up to me to figure out whether or not they know what that means. So if somebody tells me they're Muslim, they just told me that they get their spiritual guidance from a religion founded by a raping, murdering pedophile. That's all I need to know about them. I don't want anything else to do with them. So anyway, tonight, I am gonna talk about some totally unrelated legislation, and then we're going to take some calls. And if you have questions, you can either call in when the time comes. The number is 731-333-3112, or you can ask your question in the chat. I'm going to cover the legislation first, and then we'll open that up. And let me slide. And I do have an announcement or two for a little bit later on. Okay. All right, legislation. So Tennessee Firearms Association, there are several bills still having to do with firearms that the TFA, Tennessee Firearms Association, is watching this week. They'll be in committee tomorrow and or Wednesday. And if we could put that link up there. You know, there's several of them. I just encourage you to go to the site and look. They give you a good rundown of the bills that are in committee. And, you know, I know that they're going to be getting out, closing the legislature soon. They're going to close all the committees down. As I understand it, they want to get out of there before the week of the 15th because some of these legislators have been subpoenaed, and they're going to have to appear in the trial involving Glenn Casada, the former Speaker of the House. But go to the Tennessee Firearms Association, go to TennesseeFirearms.com, and look at the different bills that will be in committee this week. And hey, guys, they created a easy-to-use email system for you that you can just email all the members of the committees for the different bills that will be heard this week. They'll be in committee tomorrow and or Wednesday. And use that system. They went through a lot of trouble to create it. It's not free. It's not cheap for them. It is for you. All you have to do is fill it out and send it. Let them know. Let the legislators know where you stand on this legislation. So I'd encourage you that. Now, the pesticide bill. We talked about the pesticide bill last week. It's House Bill 809. It'll be in the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. So be a good time to give that committee a call. Remember, it seems that the farmers have been convinced by companies like Bayer and Monsanto and others that, well, if we don't pass this legislation, the trial lawyers are going to basically put us out of business as far as glyphosate goes. And if you don't have glyphosate, you're going to be out of luck. You're just not going to be able to produce. Well, I don't really believe that. And I'm, once again, no, not a farmer. But we did a show on it last week. I encourage you to look at that. I encourage you to get involved, look and see what's going on here. This is one of those rare situations where, okay, yeah, is the left opposing this in Tennessee? Yes, but so is the right. There's a lot of conservatives that are concerned about this bill because it basically gives a pass. It's like, okay, this is going to prevent them from being sued because they're basically saying, well, hey, the EPA bought off on it. There's no warning on the EPA label. Therefore, if something happens, you can't sue. And understand that there are some farmers that are on the other side of this. You know, some of them are so afraid that they'll lose glyphosate. Others are like, no, we need to be able, if we are harmed through the use of their material, of their product, we need to be able to sue. And, you know, I agree. And like I say, I'm not a fan of trial lawyers. But this is a bill that does not, this protection for Monsanto and other companies like it, this is not a bill that needs to pass. TennesseeStands.org is another great site for bills to monitor. Several different bills this week. There's some election bills. There's the conservation easement bill, information about that. Let's not forget about that. That's a property rights issue. And that one's up in committee this week. So we need to look at that as well and make your voice. Now, also, Tennessee Eagle Forum, another great website to go to and see what other legislation. They're going to be running out of time here. I'm sure by next week they'll be everything will be closed down and the session will end. So we don't want them to push. Oh, and that brings up another thing. I guess now, and I apologize. I'll see if I can find the bill number. They want to force, the GOP wants to force all the GOP counties, all the county leaders, all the GOPs across the state to do primaries for local elections. They don't want them to have the ability to do caucuses anymore or to do county conventions. Well, a lot of the small counties, and mine's a small county, we don't have a lot of people in the party. We don't have a lot of people involved. A lot of counties are that way. Well, if you do a primary, it costs you money. Okay, and matter of fact, a couple of years ago, our county GOP, we voted against doing a primary because it was not a presidential election year, and we would have had to pay for the primary, or excuse me, our county would have had to have paid for the primary. It's $26,000, not a huge amount, but your parties are private entities. And I personally don't think primaries, I think they should be handled privately by the parties. If they do a primary, that's fine and well, but they pay the bill for it. If they do a caucus, which certainly should be an option, a caucus and a convention should certainly be an option for the small counties. Well, what they want to do away with the option for counties to do a caucus or to do a convention and force everybody to do primaries, which means they're forcing the taxpayers of all the counties to cover that cost. And that's not right. It's a private entity. And you shouldn't, I think it's already wrong to shift that cost to the taxpayers. I think primaries should be paid for and ran by the parties. There shouldn't be any state involvement with the election portion of that. Now, that's my personal opinion, but I definitely think it's wrong for the legislators who are trying to take away the option of county parties to do a caucus if they want, or do a convention if they want. And I haven't heard anything from the SEC. Well, excuse me, I've heard something from some of the SEC members. Chris Morris has been very vocal about this. I haven't heard anything from Scott Golden, the chairman. If he's made a statement, I'm not aware of it. He may have. But this should be an SEC decision, not a state legislature decision. I mean, we can't get these guys to close the primaries. Now they want to force even the county parties for any election. I mean, they want to force the county parties when they're electing their leadership. They want them to do a primary instead of a caucus or a convention, and that would apply for local races as well. Your county elections. That's an additional cost, and that's wrong. I think it's wrong to try to push that on us. You'll be hearing more about that, but there's not a whole lot of time to react. They're just now bringing this up towards the end. I'm assuming they had the bill ready, and it'll be in committee this week. So if anybody's got any comments on that or thoughts, like I say, you can bring it up in. Okay. All right. We do have a question from the chat line. Go ahead.
The question is, why do we think that Muslims in a neighborhood are a bad thing?
Well, I think, why do we think, or why do I think?
Why was it brought up?
Why was it brought up? Well, I think they're actually if you look at their history over 1,400 years, wherever they've been, they're a danger. They're totally incompatible with civilized society, with our Constitution, if you look at what they believe. So if you had a whole neighborhood, I think that neighborhood would, my personal opinion is, it would become a no-go zone for local authorities. Just like in France, just like in parts of Germany, other places, all the stuff that's going on, I think it would be a problem. Now, that's my opinion. Okay, all right. Okay, I want to do a quick announcement and we'll come back to questions. If you're interested in learning about the Tennessee Constitution, Attorney Jeff Cobble will be teaching a class on the Tennessee State Constitution Saturday, April 12th from 1 to 6 p.m. Central at the Peachtree Learning Center located at 100 North Main, Sparta, Tennessee. It's a converted church, should be easy to pick out. Call 931-316-9639. The class is free, but donations are accepted. And the only thing I really have left is our guest announcement. Do we have any other questions on the chat line or on the phone? If you want to call in, 731-333-3112. Sure. We have a question? Do we have a question? Okay, great. Yeah, we'll do that at the end. That'll be the closing. David Baldwin? Hey, Dave, how are you? Okay. Okay, we're waiting for a connection with David Baldwin, retired FBI agent. He's been a guest on the show a couple times. Very knowledgeable on the threat of Islam as well. Are you there, David? David, can you hear me? Nope, not getting anything, Kevin. As this is the first time we've actually tried this way. I'm not hearing anything, Kevin. See if he'll ask the question and okay, wait a minute. Yeah, let's see if we can get him on here. Okay. All right. Anyway, while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and next week we're going to have Professor Jeffrey Adicott on here. Again, we had him a few weeks ago, and we're going to talk about the conversations that took place between Jefferson Davis and Lincoln prior to the battle at Fort Sumter. The 161st anniversary will be coming up the weekend of the 12th to the 14th. And so we're going to have some discussions about that. It may not be exactly how you thought it was or what you were taught. You know, there's a lot. We get these, we find out all these things after the fact. You know, we're like, for instance, the JFK files, we're learning some things there. And we now know that over the last 50, 60 years, things have not necessarily been the way we were taught. Well, I got news for you. It goes back a whole lot further than that. There's a lot of things that we're told in school and through the media that's not exactly accurate or doesn't tell the whole story for sure. And Sumter is one of those. By the way, some of you may know this, some of you may not. The only people killed on the attack at Fort Sumter were the people killed at the end, at the surrender ceremony. Some ordnance accidentally exploded and killed a couple people. There was nobody actually killed during the battle, just during the retreat ceremony or surrender ceremony. That is the only people that were killed or injured. And I didn't know that for years. I found that out a few years ago, but I mean, you always imagined, wow, Fort Sumter, and it was a long bombardment, but no, nobody killed during the actual. Okay. So we had David Baldwin on the line, and okay, we're going to try to connect here again. And we'll try to do this a little more in the future. And maybe we'll get it down pat a little better in the future. Hey, just have him ask the question in chat or make the comment in chat if we can't get the connection. Now, it's strange because we've used that line before when we've had people who who can't Zoom for whatever reason. I mean, this is the line we use for them to call in when we've had guests, and we've used it the whole time with, yeah. Can you hear me, Dave? Dave, can you hear me? Oh. Okay. Okay. One more. Can you hear me, Dave? Can you hear me? All right. Well, yeah, I don't know what the problem is. We got any questions on the chat line or any comments? If somebody has another bill that you want me to remind the audience about, or something else that's coming up that you want me to remind the audience about, go ahead and hit it on the chat, and we'll put it out. We'll go here for another few minutes, and then we'll probably sign off. And I apologize that I didn't per se have a backup program tonight. Haven't actually had this situation before, but I'll do a little better job on that in the future. Okay, so somebody suggested doing a show on John Brown and his terrorism and how that helped, lead us to the Civil War. And if you don't know much about the Civil War, look at the period really starting in the 1850s. Okay, that is, you hear about Uncle Tom's Cabin came out in 1852 or whenever, and then you had you've heard of Bloody Kansas. And you had the fighting in Missouri. Basically, you had a quasi-war going in Kansas and Missouri. What a lot of people don't understand is first off, back up a little bit. When our country was formed, the Constitution was passed, every state was a slave state. The North ended slavery for the most part in, I don't remember the last... actually Delaware, which was a Union state, they still had slavery during the Civil War, as did Maryland, as did Kentucky. Of course, Kentucky and Maryland were not allowed to leave the Union. Lincoln made sure he sent enough troops there to keep that from happening. But the North had emancipated theirs over time. And oh, by the way, they didn't make the freed slaves feel very welcome where they were at. Okay, and so it's not like they were, even though many of them were sincerely against slavery, that doesn't mean they wanted freed slaves from the South to come north. You can even, if you read de Tocqueville from France, he came over here in the 1830s, and that's one of the things that he noticed. He said, it seems strange, and then I'm paraphrasing, of course, that the states in the North that had already ended slavery seemed to have more animosity towards free blacks than the South. The South catches all the bad press on everything. They catch the blame for everything. But the North had slavery. The North made a fortune off slavery. I mean, they were brought into northern ports. The ships that brought them over here there were no slaves brought here under the Confederate flag. They were all brought here under the U.S. flag. Okay, but anyway, as a matter of fact, in the 1830s, there were actually more abolition societies in the South than they were in the North. But by the 1850s, you had issues over expansion into the Western territories, and the big thing was that the North, the Union, and the abolitionists. And just to the North in general, not only did they not want slaves in the Western Territory, they didn't want blacks, period. And you don't hear that. You just, they don't want slavery. Not only do they not want slavery there, because they didn't want to compete with slave labor, understandable, but they didn't want blacks there. States like Illinois, state like Indiana, Michigan, places like that had laws that really kept any free blacks. Because there were free blacks in the South. There were quite a few free blacks in the South on the eve of the Civil War. They were not all slaves. And oh, by the way, there were black plantation owners, large plantation owners. You don't hear about that. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Let me get back to the top. So one of the things that you had in Kansas and in Missouri especially, but other places as well. And I'm not an expert on John Brown, but John Brown, if you remember when he was killed in Harper's Ferry, you had the raid on Harper's Ferry. The goal was to take the weapons and him and his band, and they were going to go take those weapons and gather up as many blacks as they could, and they were going to kill they were going to kill all the slave owners and their families, and of course they were ready to kill anybody else they had to kill. That was the plan. A lot of the people, especially the abolitionists during this time period, the way they talked about everybody from the South, the way they condemned everybody from the South, and of course, especially the slave owners. I mean, they basically made them out as if they were the devil. And you got to remember the backdrop of this. You had the Nat Turner slave riots in 1831, where they killed whole families, babies and cribs included. It hadn't been all that long since you had the slave riots in Haiti, where they killed every white they could find. So the South's got have a large slave population. And you've got these people from the North encouraging murder, basically dehumanizing the slave owners and the South in general, Southerners in general, okay? And that's what they heard for all that time frame. And so Harper's Ferry comes, and here you've got John Brown trying to do that, trying to go kill a bunch of whites. Well, they knew that the whites in the South, even though they didn't own slaves, they knew it was not going to be limited to them. To the slave owners. I mean, they would be at risk as well. So you had all that kind of stuff going on. And it's really hypocritical for the North because, and especially the abolitionists, because even though the abolitionists wanted to end slavery, that doesn't mean they wanted to bring the blacks up there. Abolitionists for a long time were not very popular even up north. And because of people like Brown, who wanted to, basically their message was murder all the slave owners. That was their message. And anybody gets in your way. And of course, there were a lot of, it was found out later, there were a lot of prominent people in the North and people with some money who were financially supporting John Brown. So when you see he was kind of made a hero of after he was hung, you can kind of see why people from the South would be kind of leery of the people in the North, because a lot of them had been encouraging, not all of them by any means, and I'm not even saying a majority, but a lot of them. And oh, by the way, when the Republicans win, the first election was 1856, they won in 1860, that was the party the abolitionists were in. Now, not everybody in the Republican Party was abolitionist. Not everybody in the Republican Party really cared about slavery one way or the other than I would say most of them did not want it in the Western territories. So there was a lot of bad, we don't hear this. All we hear is, if you listen to what they tell you, you would think that the South created slavery, that everybody in the South owned slaves, that everybody in the South was abusing. And look, I have no desire or interest to be involved with slavery on either end, okay? Want nothing to do with it. That's the only good thing that came out of the war, was that it ended, although that's not really what the war was about. It had a lot to do with what secession was about, especially for the southern states, the deep South states, not so much the upper states, not so much Tennessee. Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas did not secede till after Sumter. And I don't want to get into too much of next week, but they did not secede until after Sumter. And they didn't secede until Lincoln called up for 75,000 troops. Well, we only had like 13,000 troops in the whole army at the time. So you're calling up 75,000 troops and you want to invade the South. As I said, Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Arkansas being the least important of those four states in numbers and leadership. They'd already voted that they weren't leaving the Union. They said, no, not going to do it. But after Lincoln called up troops and it was obviously going to be an invasion, they're like, no, okay, we're going to raise troops, but we're not going to raise them for you. That's what happened. So we get this oversimplified version, which is a total lie, of why we had a civil war. I would encourage you, too, to go look at the financial situation from the 4 months from December of 1860 till March of 1861. Look at what was not happening in the ports up north, and then think about that a little bit. No way the Union could survive if you had another country to your south with ports trading with Europe. Oh, and by the way, you weren't going to have a tariff, or you would have a very low tariff. That is more what to do with the actual why they went to war. Plus, Lincoln believed, which is contrary to the founding, that we were one nation. We were not founded as one nation. The Declaration of Independence says independent states. Treaty of Paris, it was made, yes, we had representatives from Congress, but each state was listed out. They were all sovereign states. We operated under that way for the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution was a continuation of that, except we gave specific, delineated, limited power to the federal government to do specific things. Most people believe that up until Lincoln's time frame. Oh, by the way, Lincoln believed in secession as late as 1846. When he was in Congress, he believed in secession, as did many people. So there's a lot of oversimplification out there, and I don't want to get too much into that. We got any other questions or any other comments in the chat room? Kevin? Francis Wright, and what was it? Neshoba Plantation. Near Memphis. Don't know anything about that. And that was, she was working to end slavery. Yeah. What time frame was that? Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I do know that there was a sizable plantation owned by a black guy in around Rutherford County in the 1850s. And Louisiana had several large plantations owned by blacks that were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation, which, oh, by the way, just remember the Emancipation Proclamation did not legally free anybody, which is why they had to do the 13th Amendment. Lincoln himself said it was a wartime measure. Had no effect. I mean, okay, first off, it didn't apply to Kentucky. Didn't apply to any state in the North that had slaves. Only applied to the states in the South where the government couldn't actually enforce it, even if they had the legal authority to do it, right? They weren't there. All right. And part of that was to keep England and France probably from deciding to maybe support the South a little more because their populations were dead set against slavery. So nice touch for Lincoln to say, hey, we're freeing the slaves, which just a wartime measure. Didn't mean anything. And if you're serious about it, would you not end it in the places you controlled? Okay, it didn't even end it in the places under Union control. It ended it in places the Union had no control, which makes it a farce. But he's the great emancipator. Remember, Lincoln was a railroad lawyer. Okay, he was a railroad lawyer that railroaded the country into a war as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, any other questions or comments? So I'm sure I have probably irritated a few people tonight, but oh well. You'll probably really be irritated next week. Reminder, next week, we'll be talking about the conversations between Jefferson Davis and Lincoln prior to Fort Sumter with Professor Jeffrey Atticott. And I hope you'll join us for that. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.